Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahm, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Dhyanamoolam Guru Murti Pujamulam Guru Padam Mantramulam Guru Vakya Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Shivam friends. So today we will take chapter 13 of 5th book Upasna Khand in Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayan. And in this 13th chapter, Vasishtha is saying that the government of the mind, consciousness is real and mind is not. Now Ram, like King Janak, and without any difficulty or failing, reflect on the Supreme Spirit in your own spirit and know what the wise meditate upon. The wise man of active pure variety, that is Rajas Sattvic, like Janak and other holy sages, obtain their desired objects by themselves. As long as you continue to restrain your organs of sense from their objects, divine soul will grace your inner soul with its presence. When the Lord, God and Supreme Soul is gracious to you, you will see a halo of light cast over all things, dispersing all grief from your sight. The sight of the Supreme Spirit will remove the plentiful seeds of bias from your mind, and it will drive away the sorrowful sights of misery pouring upon your view in copious showers. Continue like Janak in the willful discharge of your duties and prosper by placing your intellectual sight on the divine light shining in your inner spirit. It was by reflecting inwards that Janak found the impermanence of the world. By placing his faith in the unchangeable spirit, in time he found its grace. Hence, the pious acts of man, their riches and their friends are of no use for their salvation from the miseries of life. Only their own efforts are of use for the enlightenment of their soul. They who place their reliance upon faith in gods and depend upon them to fulfill their desires and future rewards are perverted in their understanding and cannot be heirs to immortality. He is saved from misery in this ocean of the world by reliance on his own reasoning and resignation, and by his spiritual vision of the Supreme Spirit. Attaining this blessed knowledge of intuition, which removes our ignorance, is what they call getting fruit fallen from heaven. The intelligence which looks into itself, as Janak did, finds the soul developing of itself inside, just as the lotus bud opens of itself in the morning. The firm conviction of the material world melts into nothing under the light of perception, just as thick and hard ice dissolves to liquid under the sun's heat. The consciousness that this is I is like the shade of night, and it is dispelled at the rise of the sun of intellect when the omnipresent light appears vividly to sight. As soon as one loses his self-consciousness that this is me, the all-pervading soul opens fully to his view. As Janak abandoned consciousness of his personality together with his desire, so you, O Ram, O intelligent Ram, forsake them by your acute understanding and the discernment of your mind. After the cloud of egoism is dispersed and this fear is cleared all around, The divine light shall shine as brightly as a second sun. It is the greatest ignorance to think of one's own personality. When this thought is relaxed by the sense of our nothingness, we give room to the manifestation of holy light in the soul. Don't think of the entity or non entity of yourself or others, but preserve the tranquility of your mind from thoughts of both positive and negative existences in order to get rid of your sense of distinction between producer and the produced. Again, fostering a fondness for something as good and a hatred for others as bad is only a disease of your mind that serves only to make you uneasy. Don't be fond of what you think to be beautiful or be disgusted at what appears hateful to you. Get rid of these opposite feelings and be even minded by fixing it on the One before whom all things are alike and equally good. They who view the desirable and the detestable in the same light are neither fond of the one nor adverse to the other. Until the fancy of the desirability of one thing and the dislike of the other is effaced from the mind, it is as hard to have the good grace of equanimity, just as it is difficult for moonlight to pierce a cloudy sky. The mind that considers one thing to be appropriate and another as inappropriate is deprived of the blessing of detachment. Just as Sakota plant is despised because it has no flowers or fruit, where there is a craving for the desirable and an aversion to what is unseemly, and when there is a cry for gain and an outcry at one's loss, it is impossible for even mindedness, dispassion, or tranquility to abide in the mind. There being only the essence of one pure Brahma diffused throughout the universe, it is very improper to take the one as many and among them something as good or bad. Our desires and dislikes are the two apes living on the tree of our hearts. While they continue shaking and swinging that tree with their jogging and jolting, there can be no rest. Freedom from fear and desire, from exertions and action, together with wisdom and equanimity, are the inseparable accompaniments of ease and rest. The qualities of forbearance and feeling for our fellows, accompanied with contentment and good understanding, and joined with a mild disposition and gentle speech, are the indispensable companions of a wise man, who rid himself of desires and his feelings of liking or dislike. The mind, running to meanness, is to be repressed by restraining passions and desires, just like the current of water is stopped by its wall. Shun the sight of external things. They are the roots of errors and fallacy. Always consider their internal properties, both when you are awake and asleep, and also when you are walking about or sitting down. Greedy men are caught like greedy fish in the hidden net of desires that are incapable of being satisfied. That net is woven with the threads of worldly cares, and it is under the waters of worldly affairs. Now, Ram, cut the meshes of this net with the knife of your good understanding and throw it in the water like a tempest tearing thick clouds apart and scattering them in the air. Try, O gentle Ram, to uproot the root of worldliness that sprouts forth in the weeds of vice. Use the hatchet of your perseverance and the eliminating shawl of your penetration. Employ your mind to cut down the cravings of your mind, like using an axe to cut down a tree. Then you will rest quietly as you arrive at the state of holiness. Having destroyed the former state of your mind by its present state, try to forget them both in future by your heedless mind and manage yourself unmindful of the world. Your utter oblivion of the world will prevent the revival of your mind and stop the reappearance of ignorance which accompanies the mind. Whether you are waking or sleeping or in any other state of your life, you must remember the nothingness of the world and give up your reliance on it. Leave off your selfishness, O Ram, and rely upon the detachment of your soul. Lay hold of whatever offers itself to you and without seeking for it. As the Lord God does everything and yet is aloof from everything, so must you do all acts outwardly without you mixing in anything. Knowing the knowable, one finds himself like the uncreated soul and a great Lord of all. But being apart from that soul, he sees only the material world spread before him. He who has the sight of the inner spirit is free from thoughts of the external world and is not subjected to joy or grief or sorrow or any other evil of his life. He is called a yogi who is free from passions and hatred and looks on gold and rubbish in the same light. He is joined with his joy in his yoga and disjoined from all worldly desires. He enjoys the fruit of his own acts and minds not what he wastes or gives away. He has the evenness of his mind in every condition and is unaltered by pain or pleasure. He is not plunged into any difficulty who receives what he gets and is employed with whatever offers of itself to him, without considering the good or evil that he is to gain by it. He who is certain of the truth of the spiritual essence of the world yearns not for its physical enjoyments, but remains even-minded at all times. The dull mind follows the active intellect in accomplishing its objects, just as the carnivorous cat or fox follows a lion in search of meat scraps. As the servile band feeds on the flesh acquired by the lion's prowess, so the mind dwells upon visible and sensible objects which it perceives by power of the intellect. Thus, the unsubstantial mind lives upon the outer world with the help of the intellect, but as it comes to remember its origin from consciousness, it recoils back to its original state. The mind, moved and lit by the heat and light of the lamp of consciousness, becomes extinct without its physical force and grows as motionless as a dead body. The nature of consciousness is known to exclude the idea of motion or pulsation from it. The scriptures call the power that has vibration reasoning or the mind. The breathing of the mind, like the hissing of a snake, is called its imagination. But by knowing consciousness as the self, the mind comes to the true knowledge of the inner soul. Consciousness, free from thoughts, is the everlasting Brahma. But being joined with thought, it is called the imaginative principle or the mind. This power of imagination, having assumed a definite form, is called the mind. The mind, with its will and its choices, is situated in the heart of living beings. With its two distinct powers of imagination and will, the mind is employed in the acts of discriminating and choosing the agreeable from what is disagreeable to it. Consciousness, being seated in the heart with its thoughts and wills, forgets its spiritual nature and remains as a dull material substance. The intellect, being this confined in the hearts of all animals in this world, continues in utter oblivion of its nature until it is awakened to itself, either by its intuition or the instruction of teachers or otherwise. Intellect is awakened by instructions from the scriptures and teachers, by the practice of dispassion, and by subjugation of the organs of sense and action. When the minds of living beings are awakened by learning and self control, they tend towards the knowledge of the great Brahma, or else they wander at random about the wide world. We must therefore awaken our minds that are dormant to divine knowledge, rolling in the pit of worldliness from intoxication of the wine of error. As long as the mind is not awakened, it is unconscious of everything. Though it perceives what can be perceived, yet this perception is as false as the sight of a city in our fancy. But when the mind is awakened by divine knowledge to the sight of the Supreme Being, it presents everything in itself, just as the inner fragrance of flowers also pervades the outer petals. Though consciousness has the quality of knowing everything contained in all the three worlds, yet it has only little knowledge of them because of its insufficient desire to know them. The mind without intellect is a dull block of stone, but it is opened by divine light, like the lotus bud opening under sunlight. The mind that imagines is as devoid of understanding as a statue made of marble is unable to move about by itself. How can regiments drawn in a painting wage war? How can moonbeams make the medicinal plants emit their light? Who has seen dead bodies smeared with blood running about on the ground? Who has witnessed stone fragments singing musical chorus in the woods? Where does this stone idol of the sun dispel the darkness of the night? Where does an imaginary forest of the sky spread its shade on the ground? It is in vain and to no purpose that people imagine the existence of the world, of the mind. It is proved to be an unreality and has no substantiality of its own. Therefore, O magnanimous Ram, never give rise to false imaginations of any kind, and particularly that of the mind, which never exists anywhere. False fantasies arise like a mirage from the lack of full knowledge of things. They spring in the heart, which is as barren as a desert, for want of the rain of full knowledge. The mind is a dead thing owing to its lack of form or action, and yet it is idolized in the circles of common people. It is a wonder. It is a wonder that the mind, having no soul or essence, no body or size or support of its own, should spread its net over all ignorant minds. One who falls victim to his unarmed and impotent mind is like a man who says his body has been injured by a lotus flower falling upon it. The man who is undone by his inner dumb and blinded mind is like one who complains of being burned by the cool beams of the full moon. People are truly killed by an antagonist who is present before them. But it is a wonder that the ignorant are foiled by the non existent mind of their own making. What is the power of that which is a creation of mere fancy? An unreal presentation of ignorance, and which, being sought after, is nowhere to be found. It is a great wonder that man should be overcome by their impotent mind that deals only in delusions. Ignorance is ever exposed to dangers, and the ignorant are always the victims of error. No, the unreal world is the creation of only ignorance and of the ignorant. Oh, the misery of miseries that the ignorant make this creation of ignorance for themselves, and that they fabricate a living soul for the sole purpose of their sufferings. I know this frail world is a creation of the false imagination of the ignorant, and that this earth is as fragile as to be broken and carried away by the waves of the ocean. It is like black eyeliner that is broken down by surrounding waters or seas, serving as its grinding mill. Yet men are maddened with it like those struck by moonbeams. The visible world disappears at the sight of reason, just as a man flies from the sight of his foe. The mind's streams of imaginary creations flee like hosts of demons defeated by the gods. Thus, this world, which is a false creation of fancy and exists nowhere except in the idle brains of the ignorant, is lost into nothing at the sight of reason. He who is not able to govern his mind and efface the thoughts of this false world that only arise in the minds of the ignorant is not worthy of being advised in the abstruse doctrines of spirituality. Those who are confirmed and self sufficient in their belief of what can be perceived by the physical senses are unable to grasp the subtle science of abstract philosophy, and therefore are unfit to receive spiritual instruction. Men accustomed to the lotus beatings of drum, accustomed to the loud beatings of the drum, are as unconscious to soft tunes of the lute as they are startled at seeing the face of a sleeping friend. Then who fly with fear away from the loud preaching of false preachers cannot have the patience to listen to the silent lesson of their inner guide. They who are deluded by their own minds can hardly be reclaimed by any other. Those who are tempted to taste the bitterness of worldly pleasures as being sweet are so subdued by its effects on their understanding that they altogether lose the power of discerning the truth. Therefore, it is useless to reason with them. With this, chapter 113 comes to an end. Oh, sorry, not 113. This chapter 13 comes to an end, and we will rest today's session here itself. We will again meet for the next chapter 14. Until then, Shivoham, friends.